Next matchup, Niners-Bears, 1 o'clock kickoff on Sunday, 9/11. San Francisco's the 7-point favorite on the road, totals 41.5. And as much as people hate the Bears' chances, I'm actually not real excited about first-year starter Trey Lance. Everybody's talking about him. Everybody's real excited about him. But I really think people are caught up in talent, ability, and potential. He has all three of those. Talent, he's got it. Ability, potential. But people, I think, place more stock, especially bettors, in hope rather than facts, data, and experience. And, of course, you got to remember, it really doesn't matter how athletic or talented you are. At that quarterback position in this league, you've got to have experience if you want to thrive. This is a really tough league to thrive in at quarterback when you haven't started a whole season. Now, I think this win total at 10 is a little high for San Francisco. I don't bet a lot of futures, but I'll probably sprinkle a little bit on the under in this one. And I'll tell you this much, as good as the Niner defense was last year, and believe me, they were good. They were tough to score against. San Francisco did run into some issues last year with the likes of Cincinnati, Minnesota, and the Rams. So, you know, they're not completely, impenetrable. Anyway, San Francisco, they're taking on a Bears team who's definitely got some talent on defense. I know they had a bad year, but they got some studs on the defensive side of the ball. Robert Quinn was second in the league in sacks with 18.5. He also had 4 forced fumbles, which ranks 7th. Meanwhile, Roquan Smith had a staggering 163 tackles last year, along with 3 sacks and a dozen TFLs. Smith also had a pick 6 from that linebacker position. And if quarterback Justin Fields can continue to, use his legs, extend the play, buy himself some time, he actually did have a 1,000-yard receiver last season in Darnell Mooney. Not a lot of people talk about that, but Mooney caught 81 balls for over 1,000 yards in 4 scores. Now, injury-wise, Moore, Brisker, White, Joseph Kramer, Harry, and Patrick, they're all banged up. Meanwhile, for the Niners on the other side, Ward and Samuel are on the list themselves. And when it comes to the total, the Niners went 7-1 to the under in their final 8 games of 2021. Meanwhile, Chicago saw unders against the likes of the Giants, Minnesota, and Baltimore. I'm actually going to lean toward Chicago +7, keeping this one close, and the under 41.5. That is not going to be a popular play. All right, next matchup, Saints-Falcons, 1 o'clock East. New Orleans is -5.5, totals 42 and a hook. Now, the Saints are getting back Jameis Winston. He actually started off red hot last year in the opener. The Saints also played some incredible defense down the home stretch last season. They allowed only 11 points a game in their final 5 contests. And not only did they go 4-1 straight up in those games, they failed to cover only once during that span. Now, of course, Cam Jordan had 12.5 sacks from the edge. He was 7th in the league in that category. Meanwhile, Demario Davis, he was all over the place. He led the unit with 105 tackles along with 3 sacks. Now, offensively, on the other side of the ball, it really doesn't matter how good or bad your quarterback is. Anyone can swing it out to Alvin Kamara out of the backfield and let him do his thing. Just give him a little bit of space. All you got to do is throw a little 5-yard, 10-yard swing pass and just let him go. The running back had 47 catches along with 5 receiving touchdowns. Now, he rushed for nearly 900 yards along with a touchdown. 900 yards along with a touchdown on the ground. Now, they're taking on an Atlanta defense who simply needs to be better. These guys allowed 25 points or more in 7 out of their final 10 ball games last year. When it comes to covering the number, well, these guys didn't cover a whole lot of spreads either. They failed to cover in their last 4 straight, and they also went just 2-7 against the spread in their last 9. Now, their offensive line allowed 40 total sacks, and they averaged less than 3.8 yards per play rushing. Now, when it comes to the injury report, London is questionable. Ridley's done. Meanwhile, for the Saints, Thomas and Smith are questionable for them. Penning is out. And when it comes to the total in this one, I'm not sure the Falcons can score enough to help put this one over. They went 7-2 to the under in their last 9 ball games. And during that span I just mentioned, They scored over 21 points just once. Meanwhile, New Orleans saw 6 out of their last 7 fall under the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Saints minus 5.5, under 42 and a hook. Next game should be an interesting matchup here. I'm talking about the Browns taking on the Panthers, 1 o'clock East. Carolina's -2 at home, totals 41.5, and of course, it looks like it's going to be Baker Mayfield getting the starting nod against his former team, of course, pending any unforeseen circumstances. I'll tell you what, look for Baker to have a little bit extra juice on Sunday. He's got DJ Moore to work with, who had over 1,100 yards receiving last year, along with 4 touchdowns. He'll also have a nice safety valve with Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield. Now, the Panthers are taking on a Cleveland squad who really had a tough time covering the number last season. They failed to cover in 7 out of their final 10 ball games, with outright losses to the likes of New England and Pittsburgh twice. Now, this normally stout Browns defense also broke down a bit towards the end of the year. They actually allowed 22 points or more in 3 out of their final 5 ball games. Now, when it comes to that injury list, looks like Grant and Harris are out for the season. Deshaun Watson, of course, he's suspended 11 games for rub and tugs. Meanwhile, for Carolina on the other side, Anderson and Brown, they are questionable for them. By the way, it's Jacoby Brissett who's been named the starter for Cleveland, just in case you didn't know. Now, total-wise, the Browns saw their last 4 games all fall under the number, 6-1 to the under in their final 7 of last year as well. Meanwhile, Carolina, on the other side, they saw unders last year against the likes of New Orleans, Tampa Bay, and New England. I'm actually going to lean toward Carolina -2 and the under 41.5. Next ball game, it is going to be Ravens-Jets, 1 o'clock East. Baltimore is the 7-point favorite on the road, totals 44.5. And even though the Ravens absolutely shit the bed last year, in the second half, it really wasn't for a complete lack of defense. They did hold their opponents to 22 points or less in 6 out of their final 9 ball games of 2021. Now, the Ravens also covered the number against the likes of the Rams, Green Bay, and Cleveland twice during that span I just mentioned. Tyus Bowser and Odafe Owe, they combined for over a dozen sacks on the pass rush. And as a matter of fact, Owe had 3 forced fumbles and a couple of fumble recoveries. So he was a bit of a turnover machine. Meanwhile, Patrick Queen, he led the charge with 98 tackles, along with double-digit TFLs. And of course, offensively, you got to account for Lamar Jackson. He rushes for over 5.5 yards per contest. He can throw it, he can run it, he can extend the play. He is one of the most exciting players I've ever watched. Anyway, Baltimore is taking on a Jets defense who just couldn't stop anyone over, well, really the past couple of seasons. These guys gave up 30 points a game in their last 10 outings. There's also a good chance they're going to work here without quarterback Zach Wilson. He's still bothered by that knee injury. Even if he starts, I really don't think it makes much of a difference. Now, when it comes to the injury list, Becton's out for the Jets. Dobbins questionable for Baltimore. When it comes to the total, Baltimore could potentially put this one over themselves. They also saw overs last year against Cincinnati, Green Bay, and Minnesota. Meanwhile, New York saw 3 out of their final 4 games last season get over the line. Of course, that is due to a lack of defense. I'm going to lean toward Baltimore -7 over 44 and a hook. Next game, Jags Commanders, 1 o'clock East. Washington's the 3-point favorite in Landover, totals 43.5. Now, the Commanders did an excellent job covering the point spread last year. They covered in 7 out of their last 9 ball games, with outright wins over the likes of Las Vegas, Carolina, and Tampa Bay. And during that time frame, Washington actually played some really tough defense for the most part. They held their opponents to 20 points or less 6 times during that 9-game stretch. Of course, Bobby McCain, he led the secondary with 4 interceptions, along with 63 tackles and a pick 6. Meanwhile, Jonathan Allen, he had 9 sacks and double-digit tackles for loss. Now, Washington is taking on a Jacksonville squad who really had a tough time moving the football last year. These guys scored 21 points or less in their final 8 ball games. of course, throwing out Week 18. And Trevor Lawrence, he had a tough year. He completed just 59% of his passes, and he actually threw 5 more picks than he did touchdowns. And of course, that touchdown total was not all too impressive. Lawrence threw only a dozen TD passes last year, and he was sacked 32 times. Now, injury-wise, Robinson is questionable for Jacksonville. Thomas questionable for Washington. When it comes to the total, 3 out of Jacksonville's final 4 ball games of 2021 did get over the number. Pretty bad defense equals overs. Meanwhile, Washington saw overs last year against the likes of Dallas, Philadelphia, and Carolina. I'm going to lean toward the Commanders -3 and the over 43 and a hook. All right, next matchup, it is going to be the Eagles taking on the Lions, 1 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Philadelphia is the 4-point favorite in Detroit, totals 48.5. Now, the Birds certainly overachieved last year. I know a lot of Eagles fans were disappointed with the outcome, but with that roster, brand new head coach, brand new quarterback, I don't know, man. That's a great season. Make the playoffs, 9 wins. They like I said, they overachieved with first-year head coach, first-year starter Jalen Hurts. The Eagles won 6 out of their final 8 regular season games to get into that postseason. They also covered the point spread 5 times during that time frame I just mentioned. Now, this Eagle offense, they actually showed a lot of firepower down the home stretch last year. They averaged over 27 points a game in their last 8 regular season games. Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, they combined for over 1,700 yards receiving and 9 touchdowns. And on the defensive end of the ball, this Birds D-line is going to be a lot to deal with. Javon Hargrave and Josh Sweat, they already combined for 15 sacks last season. And of course, with the addition of Jordan Davis in the rotation along with Fletcher Cox, opposing O-lines, they're going to be pretty gassed by the third quarter. Now, Philadelphia, they're taking on a Lions team who played some pretty bad defense last year themselves. They allowed 30 points a game in their final 6 contests. And when it comes to this offensive line, they allowed 35 sacks over 17 ball games. You guys probably already know I'm not a big rah-rah guy. I don't like the rah-rah coaches. DC Dan Campbell, he's a cool guy. He's great, got a lot of personality. Talk doesn't cook the rice. I don't care how inspirational your speeches are, how much you want to pump the guys up. That doesn't win ball games. Preparation and talent and coaching, those win ball games. Anyway, injury-wise, Onwuzurike, however you say it, Onwuzurike, he's questionable for Detroit. Miles Sanders, he's questionable for Philly. When it comes to the total, the Eagles saw overs against Dallas, the Jets, and New Orleans last year. Meanwhile, Detroit went 4-2 to the over in their last 6. I'm going to lean toward Philadelphia -4 over 48.5. Next matchup, Patriots-Dolphins, 1 o'clock East. Miami's -3, totals 47. Now, the Fins were absolute covering machines down the home stretch last season. They went 8-2 against the spread in their last 10. And they actually got the outright W 8 times during that stretch. Really made a lot of money for their backers. And defensively, these guys were definitely clicking. They allowed only 15 points a game in their final 9 ball games. Xavier Howard led the secondary with 5 interceptions, along with a pick 6 and a scoop and score. Meanwhile, Emmanuel Ogbah and Jalen Phillips, they combined for 17.5 sacks in the backfield. And when it comes to offensive production, believe it or not, guys, the Fins did have a 1,000-yard receiver in Jalen Waddle. And obviously, he's going to be a little bit more of a threat with most of the attention going to newly acquired Tyreek Hill. Now, Miami's taking on a Patriot squad who notoriously struggles in Miami. They notoriously struggle with Miami, let alone playing in Miami. A lot of problems for them historically. Now, the Patriots played some really bad defense down the home stretch last year. They allowed 27 points or more in 4 out of their final 5 ball games. And in addition to losing 4 out of those 5 games, the Pats allowed 35 points a game on average in those losses. Now, offensively, the Pats' passing attack, they didn't particularly keep D coordinators up at night. New England's leading receiver had less than 900 yards and only a couple of touchdowns. Now, total-wise, New England's last 4 contests did get over the number. Meanwhile, Miami saw overs against the likes of Carolina, New York Jets, and this very New England squad. I'm going to lean toward Miami -3 over 47. Next matchup, Colts Texans, 1 o'clock East. Indianapolis is -8, totals 44. Now, the Colts absolutely dominated Houston last season. They beat them by a total of 62-3 in their 2 head-to-head meetings. Not only do they have better talent, I think they're getting outcoached. Even if they had equal talent, I think Frank Reich is going to outcoach you. They also have a guy at quarterback, Matt Ryan, who's going to be able to manage a game, make little mistakes, and throw it away if he has to. He's not going to do too much like Carson Wentz. And when it comes to offensive weapons, why would you do too much? Jonathan Taylor rushed for a staggering 1,811 yards along with 18 touchdowns. Just as long as you can set up the run, you're going to be all right. And surprisingly, the Colts did have a 1,000-yard receiver in Michael Pittman Jr. He had nearly 1,100 yards receiving along with 6 scores. Now, defensively, the Colts actually did a nice job in the second half of the season as well. They gave up 23 points or less in 6 out of their final 8 ball games. Kenny Moore and Darius Shaquille Leonard combined for 8 interceptions. And the reason why I said Darius Shaquille Leonard, he's actually going by Shaquille Leonard now. Darius Leonard is now Shaquille Leonard. That is actually his middle name. And he wants to go by Shaquille or maybe even Shaq. But anyway, Darius Shaquille Leonard. Keep that in mind for, fantasy, by the way. A lot of folks who play fantasy, they don't really pay attention all that much to football, especially the names. So if you're looking for Darius Leonard, you had him on your team last year, you can't find him. His name's Shaquille now. He identifies as Shaquille. But anyway, linebacker Bobby Okereke, he led the charge with a staggering 132 tackles. Now, Indy's taking on a Houston team who had significant problems on the defensive side of the ball. These guys allowed 27 points a game in their final 6 contests. When it comes to offensive production, their leading rusher ran for less than 430 yards for the entire year. Now, injury-wise, Rivers is out for Houston. Pay is questionable for Indy. And when it comes to the total, Indy saw their final 5 games last season fall under the number. Meanwhile, Houston saw unders against the likes of San Francisco, Tennessee, and Miami. I'm going to lean toward the Colts -8, under 44. Next matchup, Steelers-Bengals, 1 o'clock East. Cincinnati's -6.5, totals 44 and a hook. Now, the Bengals had an incredible run last season, and they really covered a lot of point spreads in the process. Matter of fact, these guys went a perfect 8-0 against the spread to close out the season. They also played some superb defense during that time frame. These guys allowed just 20 points a game down the home stretch on average, and that includes the postseason. Now, Logan Wilson, he had 5 total interceptions last year and well over 100 tackles. Meanwhile, Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, they combined for over 21 sacks in just the regular season alone. And of course, when you talk about the Bengals, what everyone talks about is, of course, Joe Burrow, Joe Cool. He led the Bengals to a Super Bowl appearance and over 5,700 total yards passing for the year. And of course, wideouts Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, they were 1,000-yard receivers just in the regular season alone. Both of those guys actually combined for over 2,500 regular season receiving yards along with 19 scores. Now, they're taking on a Pittsburgh squad on the other side. This is a franchise who's taking on a completely different shape. They lost their franchise quarterback to retirement, changed the name of their field. It's not even Heinz Field anymore. A lot of changes in the Steel City. And I'll tell you this much, on top of it, they played some really bad defense in the second half of the season last year. The Steelers allowed over 28 points a game in their final 9 contests of 2021. When it comes to the injury report, Watt and Johnson are banged up for Pittsburgh. And total-wise, Pitt saw overs against the likes of KC, Minnesota, and the Chargers. Meanwhile, the Bengals also saw overs themselves against the likes of Kansas City, LA, the Chargers, and of course this very Pittsburgh team. I'm going to lean towards Cincinnati, minus 6.5, over 44 and a hook. The next matchup, more divisional action. I'm talking about the Raiders taking on the Chargers, 4:25 Eastern start time. The LA Chargers are minus 3, totals 52. Now, the Chargers had little problem lighting up the scoreboard last season. They scored 27 points or more in 8 out of their final 10 ball games. They were also led by quarterback Justin Herbert, who threw for over 5,000 yards, along with 38 touchdowns. Now, Herbie's two favorite targets were Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. They combined for over 2,200 yards receiving, along with 15 scores. Now, I think where the Chargers need to really improve this year, aside from their defense, is their decision-making with the ball on fourth down. I know that they're analytics guys. They live and die by analytics. They did cost themselves a few games with questionable decision-making on fourth down, 2-point conversions as well. You got to get away from the analytics sometimes and just have a feel for the game. So that's where they need to improve. They cost themselves a handful of ball games, either going for it or calling the wrong play on fourth down. Fourth down was a problem for them last year. But anyway, regardless, they are taking on a Raider defense who certainly gave up their fair share of points themselves last year. These guys allowed 28 points a game in their final 10 matchups. And when it comes to the offensive side of things, Vegas's leading rusher, Josh Jacobs, he failed to reach 900 yards on the ground in the regular season. Now, injury-wise, standout tight end Darren Waller, he's questionable for the Raiders. Meanwhile, for the Chargers on the other side, J.C. Jackson is questionable with an ankle. When it comes to the total, 8 out of LA's last 10 outings all got over the number. Meanwhile, Las Vegas saw overs against the likes of KC, Washington, and this very Charger team. I'm going to lean toward the LA Chargers, minus 3, over 52. Next matchup, Chiefs taking on the Cardinals, 4:25 Eastern start time. Kansas City's minus 3, totals 53.5. Now, KC scored a whole bunch of points last year, and they covered a bunch of numbers in the second half. KC went 7-3 against the spread in their final 10 ball games, and they averaged 33 points a game during that span. Patty Mahomes threw for nearly 6,000 yards last year, including the postseason, for a total of 48 touchdowns through the air. Now they're taking on a Cardinal organization who feels like they're in turmoil. That whole Kyler Murray offseason contract clause was very odd to me. It was very telling. I think it tells me that the coaches are probably not on the same page as the executives. I think the executives like him. They're not football guys. They want to keep him. And I think the coaches, he's giving them headaches. But it's certainly that clause could have been warranted because Arizona lost 5 out of their final 6 ball games last year. And aside from some poor offensive production during that span, this Cardinal defense gave these guys little chance to win those ball games anyway. Arizona allowed nearly 30 points a game in their last 6 outings. Now, injury-wise, Ertz is questionable. Hopkins is out. Meanwhile, for KC, Mecole Hardman is questionable with a groin. When it comes to the total, 7 out of KC's final 8 contests last year got over the number. Meanwhile, Arizona saw overs against the likes of Seattle, Chicago, and Carolina. I'm going to lean toward the Chiefs, minus 3, over 53.5. Next game, Giants-Titans, 4:25 East. Tennessee's minus 5.5, totals 43 and a hook. Now, the Titans played some really tough defense in the latter weeks last year. They allowed just 13 points a game in their final 6 outings. Kevin Byard had 5 interceptions in the regular season, along with a pick 6 and a scoop and score. Meanwhile, Harold Landry and Danico Autry, they combined for 21 sacks in the regular season as well. When it comes to offensive production, well, running back Derrick Henry, he still averaged nearly 4.5 yards a carry, and he scored 10 times on the ground. Now, mind you, he was hurt for a lot of the season. He played only 8 games last year. Now, they're taking on a Giants team who struggled defensively in the second half of the year. They allowed 29 points a game in their final 5 contests. Meanwhile, offensively, their O-line allowed 38 total sacks on Daniel Jones. Now, Jones threw only 10 total touchdowns in 11 starts. Now, injury-wise, Johnson is out. Lemieux is doubtful. When it comes to the number, New York went 8-2 to the under in their last 10. No real surprise there. They just didn't score a lot of points last year. Meanwhile, the Titans saw 7 out of their last 10 outings of 2021 fall under the line. Of course, that's because of that great defense. I'm going to lean toward Tennessee, -5.5, under 43 and a hook. Next ball game, Packers, Vikings, 425 East. Green Bay's the 2-point favorite on the road, totals 48. Now, I actually do have concerns about Aaron Rodgers' focus. I get it. He's like the most talented quarterback I've ever seen, just athletically, talent-wise, the way he can throw the ball. But he's played the Vikings like a million times in his career, so I don't think the guy's diving balls deep into game film this week. And even though this is a really short number, you got to consider the fact that the Packers didn't cover many point spreads down the home stretch last year. They failed to cover in 4 out of their final 5 ball games last season, and they actually gave up a whole bunch of points defensively. As a matter of fact, out of Green Bay's last 8 games of 2021, they allowed 26 points per contest on average. Now, they got to face Kirk Cousins, who can still move the football despite how much hate he gets. I know you guys hate him. Pretty much everybody hates him. I think if you put out a poll, I would say out of 100 people, probably at least 75% of the people can't stand the guy. I don't really know why. He's just a dork. He's corny. But he can move the football, guys. Don't let that hate blind you. Cousins threw for over 4,200 yards last season with 33 touchdowns and only 7 picks. Of course, Jordan Jefferson also had over 1,600 yards receiving, and he combined for 20 total touchdowns with Adam Thielen. Now, rushing-wise, Dalvin Cook was a 1,000-yard rusher despite playing in just 13 games. The Vikes were actually able to put up 34 points on Green Bay in their first matchup with each other last year. Now, injury-wise, Irv Smith is questionable for Minnesota. Meanwhile, for the Pack, Crosby, Tunyon, Jenkins, and Watson, they're a little bit banged up for them. When it comes to the total, Green Bay saw 6 out of their final 8 games of 2021 get over the line. Meanwhile, Minnesota went 8-2 to the over in their last 10. I'm going to lean toward the Vikings +2 over 48. Next matchup, Buccaneers, Cowboys, 8:20 p.m. East. Tampa Bay's the 2-point favorite on the road, totals 50. And even though Tampa Bay had yet another great year, they were beating up on teams like Carolina, New Orleans, and Atlanta like several times a month. I also think there's problems with Tom Brady. I think he's getting a divorce. I said that weeks ago when he took his random leave of absence. Maybe he was getting facial reconstruction because he looks completely different. He looks. I love Tommy, but he looks terrible right now. I know he's getting older, but like his face is like sunken in and stuff. Maybe he's not eating because I said a few weeks ago I think he's getting a divorce. This guy loves practice, loves preseason, loves film, loves being with his teammates. He doesn't voluntarily take a 10-day leave of absence. For nothing. And this is a time of year, summer camp. He loves that stuff. He lives for that stuff. But anyway, moving forward, like I said, these guys, they were beating up on teams like Carolina, New Orleans, and Atlanta. Those were easy wins. Those, organizations were in shambles last year. And when they faced good teams like Buffalo, Indy, and the Rams, well, this defense gave up a considerable amount of points. Now, they're facing a Cowboy team on the other side who has little issue moving the football themselves. These guys averaged 31 points a game in their final 10 contests. And they were also led by Dak Prescott, who threw for over 4,400 yards in the regular season, along with 37 touchdowns. Dak Prescott is a guy that is underappreciated. People hate on him. They don't appreciate him. They say he can't win the big one. He can't win the big one because of the organization. It's not because of him. This guy gives any team out there your best chance to win. This is a really good, talented quarterback. Trust me. The dude's good. It's because of the organization, not because of him. Now, Dak's favorite target, that was CeeDee Lamb. He had over 1,100 yards receiving and 6 scores. And when it comes to defensive play, you really can't go without, mentioning Micah Parsons. I'll tell you what, aside from just messing up your entire blocking scheme, the guy had 13 total sacks and 84 tackles. He was playing middle linebacker, outside backer. He was on the line. Dude can do it all. Give him the football. He played running back in high school at Harrisburg, and he was unstoppable. He can play any position on the field, maybe except for quarterback. But anyway, even though Trayvon Diggs, his technique's a little sloppy, you can't ignore the fact he had a staggering 11 interceptions last year. Now, injury-wise, of course, Tyran Smith is out. A big injury for that O-line. Michael Gallup's also injured for the Cowboys. Meanwhile, for the Bucs on the other side, Evans and Godwin are questionable. Jensen is out. When it comes to the total, the Cowboys did see unders against the likes of the Niners, Arizona, and KC. Meanwhile, the Bucs saw unders against the likes of Philly, Carolina, and New Orleans. I'm going to lean toward Dallas +2 and the under 50. Next and final game for the video, it is going to be Broncos Seahawks, 8:15 Eastern kickoff on September 12th, Monday Night Football. Denver's -6.5, totals 42. And with a pretty bad football team last year, Russell Wilson was still able to throw for over 3,100 yards in 14 starts. Now, he threw for 25 touchdowns and only 6 interceptions with the Seahawks as well. Now, the Broncos, they had little problem moving the football on the ground. Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, they combined for over 1,800 yards rushing and a dozen touchdowns on the ground. And even though this Bronco defense had a couple of breakdowns late, they still held their opponents to 22 points or less in 7 out of their final 10 ball games. Now, Justin Simmons and Pat Surtain, they combined for nearly double-digit interceptions between the two of them. Meanwhile, Kareem Jackson, he led the charge with 88 total tackles. Now, they're taking on Geno Smith, who's had a lackluster career numbers-wise at quarterback. When it comes to defensive play, the Seahawks allowed 26 points a game in their final 4 contests last year. Now, when it comes to the total, 5 out of Seattle's last 6 games did get over the line. I'm also assuming Russell Wilson will not be letting off the gas if Denver gets up by a few scores. I think he's going to really try to bury these guys. Give me Denver, -6.5, over 42. And with that, guys, now it's time for our quick pick recap, powered to you by my website at patreon.com/BrockPage. I like the Rams +3, over 52.5. Chicago Bears +7, under 41 and a hook. Give me New Orleans -5.5, under 42.5 points. Carolina -2, under 41.5. Now, real quick, guys, if you want to see which one of these free picks on this video that I'm actually betting on personally, there's only one way to do that, and that's to sign up for my NFL tier package bets on patreon.com/BrockPage. I like Baltimore -7, over 44.5. Give me Washington -3, over 43 and a hook. Philadelphia -4, over 48.5. Miami -3, over 47. Indianapolis -8, under 44. Carolina -2, under 41.5. LA Chargers -3, over 52. Kansas City Chiefs -3, over 53.5. Tennessee Titans -5.5, under 43 and a hook. Minnesota +2, over 48. Dallas Cowboys +2, under 50. And with my next and final free pick for the video, I'm going to lean toward Denver -6.5, over 42. And with that, guys, that's going to do it for me. Don't forget to check me out on my website. If you guys do end up getting a membership here today on patreon.com/BrockPage, just keep in mind you're going to get billed the day you sign up and then the first of every month following that. I always tell folks in every single video, the earlier in the month you sign up, the better. And guys, if you want to get access to every single bet, every single package, every single day, you're going to want to sign up for my board member package. It's an all-inclusive membership. But most importantly, guys, got to thank you for joining me right here on YouTube. Really hope you enjoyed all this great free content, all this great free information. And with that said, guys, happy NFL Week 1. Best of luck to you. And I look forward to seeing you later on today on my website at patreon.com/BrockPage.